faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally with Book Talks. Today, we're exploring a book called Descartes. In February 1650, during the coldest winter in Stockholm, Sweden, in a luxurious apartment, a gaunt, pale-faced man gasped for breath, reaching the end of his life. He was the renowned French philosopher and scientist, Descartes. Just a few months earlier, Descartes had been invited by Queen Christina of Sweden to be her private tutor. But what Descartes never expected was that the young and energetic Christina loved listening to philosophy lectures at 4 or 5 a.m., which nearly killed him. He had to rise before dawn every day, and combined with the freezing cold mornings in Stockholm, Descartes quickly developed severe pneumonia and couldn't survive the winter. And Descartes, he died abroad at 54. Descartes only started publishing his works at 41, and by his death, it was just over 10 years. Yet, he had become Europe's most prominent philosopher at the time. His philosophical ideas influenced almost every later philosopher, earning him the title of Father of Modern Philosophy. The analytical geometry he created was a key tool in advancing mathematics. Beyond that, he explored physics, medicine, and more, significantly influencing modern scientists like Newton, becoming a recognized founder of modern science. So, what are Descartes' world-changing ideas? And how did they reshape people's understanding? Behind his brilliant achievements, what are the lesser-known stories? Today, this book on Descartes will give you a full picture of this great 17th century figure's life. The author, Tom Sorrell, is a professor at the University of Birmingham's School of Philosophy, Theology, and Religion, and director of the International Center for Ethics. And he has deep research on religion, philosophy, and the origins of modern philosophy. In this book, he thoroughly examines Descartes' life and ideas. All right, let's start with Descartes' life story. Earlier, we mentioned that waking up early and the cold weather took Descartes' life. Actually, this vulnerability was planted when he was very young, in 1596. Descartes was born into a wealthy noble family in Touraine, northwestern France. His mother died soon after giving birth to him. Descartes was a premature baby and naturally sickly since birth. So as a child, he was given special permission to sleep in. He often stayed in bed until 11 in the morning, a habit that stuck with him all his life. But Descartes wasn't just lazing around in bed. He was either reading or thinking. At age 10, Descartes was sent by his father to La Flèche College, the best church school in France at the time. It was famous throughout Europe because his father wanted him to become a respected theologian. At school, although Descartes excelled academically, he disliked some of the content taught, like scholastic philosophy. Scholastic philosophy was taught in medieval schools and aimed to promote Christian doctrine. On one hand, scholastic philosophy required people to memorize and absolutely believe religious doctrines without any thought or doubt. And on the other hand, even the speculative content was quite boring, like discussing how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Although there were some unbearable courses, 8 years of study weren't entirely useless. At school, Descartes systematically studied mathematics, physics, and other subjects, which greatly helped his future research. After graduation, at age 18, Descartes didn't enter the religious field as his father expected, but chose to travel the world. He spent over 10 years traveling to major European countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, Poland, Hungary, Austria, Germany, Italy, and more. And his travels across Europe weren't just for fun. He saw travel as a way to dismantle preconceived notions and understand the objective world. Beyond that, he witnessed many historic moments. For example, while in Frankfurt, Germany, Descartes attended the coronation of Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor. Another example, he briefly joined the army. In 1618, the 30 Years' War broke out in Europe, a large-scale conflict that started as a civil war in the Holy Roman Empire and became the first pan-European war lasting 30 years. At the outbreak of the war, 22-year-old Descartes joined the army of Prince Maurice of the Netherlands, but left soon after, likely due to health reasons. During his travels, Descartes also made like-minded friends, such as when in the Netherlands, he met a doctor 8 years his senior. Isaac Beckman was highly knowledgeable and accomplished in both philosophy and science. He had a significant influence on young Descartes. After parting ways, they maintained long-term correspondence, deeply communicating on philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and other fields. Of course, during these 10-plus years, Descartes was constantly thinking, even dreaming nonstop. In 1619, at the age of 23, Descartes recorded 3 dreams in his diary. In one dream, a stranger gave him a poem and several books. The poem began with yes and no, which Descartes saw as a symbol of truth and falsehood. One of the books he dreamed of was an encyclopedia. Descartes interpreted it as the unity of all knowledge. To Descartes, the dream was a mission bestowed by heaven, compelling him to spend his life seeking truth, rejecting falsehood, and uncovering the reality behind all knowledge. Oh, Descartes, Descartes. In 1628, at the age of 32, Descartes decided to end his travels and settled in Utrecht, Netherlands, to begin writing. K-K-E-A-S. He chose to settle in the Netherlands because, in the 17th century, known as the sea carriage driver, it was not only commercially developed, but also had many universities, making it a relatively open academic environment in Europe. He sold the property inherited from his father, thus securing enough funds to support his livelihood for the rest of his life. During his time in the Netherlands, Descartes lived a reclusive life, spending most days at home thinking, writing, or conducting scientific experiments. Usually, he only had a few servants around him, and he didn't have many close friends to interact or correspond with, but they were all academic elites. Besides the previously mentioned Dr. Beckman, they included the renowned Dutch physicist and astronomer Huygens, Leiden University mathematics professor Schouten, and others. It wasn't until age 41 that he published his first work, Discourse on the Method. We've covered this book before in Sally's Book Talks. After that, he published works like Meditations on First Philosophy, Principles of Philosophy, and Passions of the Soul, which received strong societal responses and established his status in world philosophy and science history. Yet, Descartes longed for his ideas to be understood and accepted by the world. He believed that philosophy isn't about creating isolated, novel, and obscure ideas that most people can't understand, but about starting from practical problems to solve dilemmas and challenges in thinking and practice. His works aren't lengthy because he excels at explaining things with extremely concise language. At the same time, Descartes knew well that the wise adapt to circumstances, having witnessed the tragic fates of people like Galileo and Bruno, who opposed religious forces. Therefore, although he personally despised the methods of scholastic philosophy, and his ideas often contradicted religious doctrines, in his writings, he always tried to avoid such conflicts. In Descartes' view, to continue his research and writing, he needed a place in the real world to live an ordinary life. To show that his philosophy didn't conflict with Christianity, Descartes even specifically used 3 speculative methods to prove God's existence. For example, Descartes used the principle that nothing comes from nothing and the effect cannot be greater than the cause to prove God's existence. Specifically, it means that people find within themselves the idea of God as the most perfect being, possessing infinite beauty and goodness. These ideas must have a cause, which is that God must exist, because such ideas can't arise from nothing. Nothingness isn't the cause of anything, and imperfect things can't cause perfect things. Yeah. Humans are imperfect, the objective world is imperfect, and there is no absolute beauty or goodness. Therefore, beyond them, there must be a more perfect God, possessing absolute beauty and goodness, to create humans and the objective world with flaws in beauty and goodness. And although Descartes tried hard to prove God's existence, conflicts were inevitable. This was related to his own personality. Descartes was inwardly aloof, somewhat arrogant, and rather petty, often unable to control his temper. Although his intention was to coexist peacefully with the secular world, he couldn't tolerate any criticism or accept different viewpoints. He often got into conflicts with people, and sometimes his language was quite vulgar. For example, while he superficially acknowledged God's existence, he publicly denied many views in scholastic philosophy works and mocked the revered classical Aristotelian worldview. He also supported the latest scientific research, like Harvey's theory of blood circulation. So when his work, Meditations on First Philosophy, was published, the religious establishment couldn't stand it anymore. Archbishop Voetius accused Descartes of blasphemy and heresy, even criticizing his sexual orientation, which infuriated Descartes. For the reprint, he added an appendix titled Letter to Voetius, furiously writing 200 pages refuting each criticism, point by point. Finally, he argued that the archbishop himself was the atheist and heretic. He was often very unfriendly toward other scientists, too. For instance, when physicist Pascal demonstrated the existence of vacuum, Descartes couldn't accept it. So he sharply remarked that the only vacuum on Earth was inside Pascal's head. Regarding mathematician Fermat, with whom he'd previously argued, he mercilessly declared that Fermat's mathematics was crap. Descartes' intense reactions to opposing views escalated conflicts, making him notorious throughout Utrecht. However, he gained many supporters, called Cartesians, who fiercely debated traditional conservatives. Officials, pastors, theologians, professors, and students all joined the fray. Debates about Descartes' philosophy grew so heated that crowds filled auditoriums, jumped on tables, brawled, and even rioted. Though the Netherlands had relatively free academia, this went too far, putting Descartes at risk of lawsuits and imprisonment. After seeking help from the French ambassador to the Netherlands, Descartes avoided jail. But Utrecht still banned Descartes' philosophy entirely in 1642. Yet progressive ideas can't be fully suppressed. Descartes' ideas still quickly swept across the Netherlands. For example, Leiden University, the Netherlands' most prestigious, began discussing his ideas, and this trend soon swept Europe. It was against this backdrop that in 1649, the young and knowledge-hungry Queen Christina of Sweden invited Descartes to Stockholm. And since Descartes ultimately died because of this woman, many romantic rumors about them circulated. For example, in the popular TV series The Bad Kids, Chin Hao's character math teacher Zhang Dongsheng tells a love story. Young Princess Christina fell for Descartes instantly, but her parents objected, and Descartes adored her too. Oh, and on his deathbed, he left the princess a letter with the equation r equals a times 1 minus sine theta. Seeing it moved her to tears since its graph forms a heart shape. This story sounds beautifully tragic, but reality was a bit harsh. Actually, Christina wasn't a Swedish princess at the time, but the Queen of Sweden, the highest authority. She was indeed interested in Descartes, but only in his intellectual ideas, and the real Descartes wasn't particularly romantic. Compared to his rich intellectual life, his emotional world was barren. He never married. However, while in the Netherlands, he had a relationship with a woman named Helena Jans and fathered a daughter, Francine. Yet, due to his aloof nature, he didn't marry her and raised the daughter alone. In the Netherlands, then, having a child out of wedlock was a serious crime. So Descartes carefully guarded this secret. Publicly, he claimed Francine was his niece. She might have been the love of his life, but sadly, she died of scarlet fever at age 5. After Descartes' death, Queen Christina showed little remorse or unease, quickly burying him without ceremony. Over the next few centuries, the French repatriated his remains to his homeland, reburying them multiple times. Today, Descartes' tomb is in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Paris. People seem unusually fascinated with his bones. His finger bones were once hot commodities. Some believed wearing jewelry made from his finger bones could make one smarter. People even painstakingly located his missing skull, conducting in-depth studies and reconstructing his brain model. Of course, what interests people more are the ideas that once filled that brilliant mind. So, what ideas of Descartes profoundly influenced the world? Next, I'll explain from both philosophical and scientific perspectives. First, in philosophy, Descartes' famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," epitomizes his philosophical thought. However, this wasn't his final conclusion, but rather his philosophical starting point. Descartes proposed, "I think, therefore I am," rather than "I see, therefore I am," or "I hear, therefore I am." The reason is he believed thinking is the foundation for understanding the objective world, while sensory perceptions like sight and hearing are unreliable. So, how should one think? Descartes emphasized using reason, hence, his philosophy is called rationalism. To think rationally, first and foremost, you got to be brave enough to doubt. According to Descartes, if you want to gain a correct understanding of the objective world and get truth, you need the spirit of doubting everything. Oh, in this world, only one thing can't be doubted, and that's doubt itself. What we see with our eyes or hear with our ears isn't always reliable, and it's all worth doubting. Yeah, those things taught in books, said by authorities, and thought to be right by millions of people are also worth doubting. For example, Aristotle's physics, which was treated as gospel truth, claimed that heavy objects fall faster than light ones, but experiments easily show it's wrong. And, in fact, if you ignore air friction, objects of any weight fall at the same speed. If you base your grasp of the objective world on Aristotle's physics, the conclusions you come up with are probably unreliable. Doubt means overturning all your old beliefs. So, how can you actually gain true knowledge? The foundation for rational thinking, after tossing out unreliable sensory stuff and traditional dogmas, should be basic facts that are self-evident and tested over and over by human reason and practice. For instance, axioms in math, like the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line, or only one straight line passes through any 2 points, should be the starting point for math research. All right, with a solid starting point, how do we get more correct knowledge? Well, in Descartes' view, the most reliable method is deduction. Before Descartes came up with deduction, in 1620, the famous English philosopher Francis Bacon introduced the modern idea of induction in his book Novum Organum, also called inductive reasoning. Quote, Bacon thought that by observing and experimenting on a phenomenon and then inducing, you could gain new knowledge. For example, every time you drop iodine into starch, it turns blue, so you can induce that starch turns blue with iodine. But induction has its issues, like how it's often incomplete. The most famous case is the black swan example. People observed all the swans around them, saw they were white, and concluded that all swans are white. Then one day, a black swan showed up. And boom, that whole conclusion was thrown out. To dodge this problem with induction, Descartes argued that to get truly new knowledge, you should use deduction. And deduction, also called deductive reasoning, is different from induction. Quite the opposite, it's a method that moves from the general to the specific. For example, if the premises are that all humans die and John's son is human, then we must conclude that John's son will die. Of course, deduction has issues too. While the reasoning is flawless, the premises can be doubted, like all humans die. Though our rational intuition says it's correct, it's still worth questioning. Descartes certainly understood this flaw in deduction. To address this, in his meditations, he invoked God. However, Descartes' concept of God wasn't exactly the Christian God. He borrowed the concept of an omniscient, omnipotent, perfect being, just using God as this perfect existence. For instance, God established that all humans die as an absolute premise. Similarly, God established those self-evident axioms, allowing us to derive new knowledge from such premises. Today, deduction and induction complement each other as vital methods for understanding the objective world. Most academic research combines experimentation, induction, and theoretical deduction. Of course, real-world problems are complex, often not single issues, but tangled knots of many problems. How to handle them? These seemingly chaotic, complex problems? In his discourse on method, Descartes proposed breaking complex problems into simpler ones, solving them individually, then synthesizing solutions. For example, the human body is a complex system, but we can break it down.
In Treatise of Man, Descartes wrote that the human body consists of parts with different functions.
The heart is like a furnace, lungs like chimneys, liver like a filter, blood vessels like rivers, and so on. These different parts combine like machine components to form a whole. When health problems arise with complex symptoms, it's often one malfunctioning part. The key is promptly identifying it to solve the overall issue. To Descartes, breaking down complex systems is ultimately about solving partial problems to preserve the more important whole. This idea of Descartes is also known as mechanistic philosophy. It influenced scientific research for 300 years. Nearly all scientific disciplines, including life sciences, followed the principle of decomposition before synthesis. Not until the mid-20th century, with the rise of systems theory, synergetics, and chaos theory, did people realize not all problems can be decomposed. Then people gradually abandoned absolute reliance on mechanism. Beyond dividing the human body into parts, Descartes separated mind and body for research convenience. His famous mind-body dualism. Earlier, we discussed Descartes viewing the body as a mechanical system, but humans are far more complex than instruction-following machines. He believed humans don't just perform instinctive, repetitive actions like machines, but have coordination, creativity, and rational thinking to improve cognition, proving the mind's existence. Descartes thought the pineal gland was the key mind-body connector. For example, heat sensation from fire travels via nerves to the pineal gland, becomes pain, triggers rational thought. This burns forward, withdraw, causing reaction. We now know the pineal gland lacks these functions. It's just a hormone-secreting gland. However, Descartes correctly described the nervous system's working mechanism. Descartes saw the mind reflecting objective matter, making him essentially a materialist. But many misinterpret "I think, therefore I am" as subjective idealism, that mind precedes objective reality, which misunderstands him. Descartes meant not that the world exists because of mind, but that only through serious thinking can we objectively recognize how the world exists. Think seriously, use rational cognition. This has become a vital force for human progress since modern times. Only when freed from religious constraints could science advance, society organize, and humans push civilization to new heights by conquering nature. This is why Descartes is called the father of modern philosophy. Descartes wasn't just a great philosopher. He made major contributions to specific scientific fields, too. Let's start with mathematics. Descartes highly valued math for two reasons. First, it's purely rational, completely objective. With correct premises and calculations, every mathematical derivation and conclusion is absolutely reliable. Second, math is foundational. Though other disciplines seem complex, they're all governed by mathematical principles expressible through math. Descartes' greatest mathematical contribution was inventing the Cartesian coordinate system, creating analytic geometry. Oh, there are many legends about how he invented it. One story goes like this. While serving in the army, Descartes fought near the town of Ulm by the Danube River. During breaks from battle, he'd still ponder mathematical problems. Reporting troop positions to superiors gave him inspiration, specifically how his platoon leader did it. The Danube flows west to east. Using Ulm as origin, downstream became positive, upstream negative for distance tracking. Meanwhile, North Bank movement was positive, South negative. This precisely located troops relative to Ohm, inspiring Descartes. Imagine the town as origin, the Rhine as x-axis, and perpendicular direction as y-axis. Boom! The coordinate system was born, directly advancing geography. Map longitude and latitude lines became the x and y axes of coordinates. But the coordinate system's greater significance? Unifying algebra and geometry. Before Descartes, algebra and geometry were separate. Analytic geometry based on coordinates unified them, but how? Algebraic equations could be graphed, like x squared plus y squared equals 1. That equation plots as a circle with radius 1. Any geometric shape placed in this system could be expressed through algebraic equations. After Descartes' death, polar coordinates emerged from this foundation, another coordinate form enriching analytic geometry. Earlier we mentioned that the heart-shaped equation r equals a times 1 minus sine theta is a polar coordinate equation. Researchers therefore infer that Descartes couldn't have written this polar coordinate heart-shaped equation for Christina during his lifetime. Besides philosophy and mathematics, Descartes also researched other natural sciences. Let's focus on physics and medicine. Descartes compared the knowledge system to a big tree. So, philosophy and mathematics are the roots. Physics is the trunk, and from the trunk of physics grow many branches, which are other disciplines. The development of modern science is based on Newton's physics. Descartes, born before Newton, also realized the importance of physics and tried to establish his own physics system. He wrote a book called The World, but due to religious pressure, it wasn't published during his lifetime. However, in the book, he had already started to unify the laws of motion for all things, similar to Newton. Descartes pointed out that the motion of all things is essentially a vortex. When explaining tides, the moon's orbit around Earth, and the weight of things on Earth, he hypothesized a vortex centered on the Earth's axis. In the universe, there are many such vortices, which cause the various motions of the sun, moon, and stars. Descartes' vortex theory is also based on mathematics and can be expressed within his system of analytic geometry. Newton had thoroughly studied Descartes' works and was greatly influenced by his mathematical and physical systems. More than 30 years after Descartes' death, Newton proposed the concept of universal gravitation and similarly built the classical mechanics system using mathematics.
Besides physics, Descartes devoted much effort to medical research, and he had reasons for doing so.
First, this is related to his personal circumstances. Descartes was sickly since childhood, so how to maintain health became a constant question for him. After the death of his illegitimate daughter Francine, in grief, he paid more attention to the study of the human body. And a more important reason for Descartes studying medicine was to serve his philosophical system. As mentioned earlier, Descartes proposed mind-body dualism, and to prove his point, he conducted some human dissection experiments. Through these experiments, Descartes not only learned the functions of various human organs, but also proposed, based on dissection, that the pineal gland is the key part connecting mind and body. Medical science in Descartes' era still contained elements of witchcraft. To Descartes, medicine as a discipline should be based on anatomy to truly understand organ functions, comparing humans to machines and organs to parts. Descartes optimistically believed that within decades, by replacing damaged parts, this great human machine could run indefinitely, granting immortality. Clearly, Descartes was overly optimistic. To this day, no one has achieved immortality this way, but organ transplants have saved many lives.
Beyond medicine, Descartes also valued ethics research.
Descartes believed if medicine keeps the body healthy, then ethics keeps the mind healthy. True health requires both. So, how should people maintain physical and mental health? Descartes' view resembles Chinese self-cultivation practices. He corresponded with Princess Elizabeth of England on this topic. In letters, he mentioned balanced diet, moderate exercise, proper medication, and adequate hydration for physical health. Meanwhile, methods like meditation maintain mental health by controlling irrational impulses, which Descartes saw as foundational for societal health too. Beyond this, he strongly advocated the concept of public good. Writing to Princess Elizabeth, Descartes argued public interest should supersede personal interest, consistent with his philosophy that the whole outweighs the part and the cosmos matters more than Earth. This shows Descartes saw unified rules governing individuals, societies, Earth, and the cosmos. With this, we conclude the main content of the book on Descartes. His epitaph reads, Descartes, the first since the Renaissance to claim and guarantee human reason's rights. It's in this sense that Descartes is considered the progenitor of modern philosophy. Guided by Descartes' banner of reason, humanity gradually abandoned blind superstition and fanaticism, achieving tremendous progress in technology, politics, and economics over recent centuries. Now, all right, that's our exploration of Descartes. You'll find the reading notes below the audio. See you next time.